The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the threadbare wool of her tunic, a predator with teeth of ice that gnawed at her bones. Alara's fingers were numb, clumsy things as she scrubbed the flagstones of the great hall. She had lost feeling in them an hour ago, the icy water in the bucket having stolen any lingering warmth. They called her the ghost, the shadow, the nothing girl. She was an omega, the lowest of the low in the Silver Moon pack, an orphan left on their doorstep as a babe. Her existence was a testament to their reluctant charity, a debt they made her repay every single day in servitude and silence. Her world was stone floors, dirty laundry, and the sharp, cutting words of those above her. It was a small, gray world, and she had long ago stopped hoping for anything more. Hope was a dangerous luxury, a warmth that only made the inevitable cold feel that much worse. A sharp kick connected with her ribs. Alara gasped. The air knocked from her lungs as she curled into herself on the wet stones. Pain, sharp and blinding, flared through her side. "Filth," Lyra sneered from above. Her voice was as polished and cruel as the silver clips in her perfectly braided hair. "You missed a spot. Are you blind as well as useless?" Lyra was the Pack Alpha's daughter, beautiful and adored, and she had made tormenting Alara her favorite pastime. She saw Alara not as a person, but as a stain to be scrubbed away. Alara pushed herself up, her body trembling. She didn't look at Lyra. Looking at her only made it worse. She focused on the gray smear of dirt on the stone, her entire universe shrinking to that single point of failure. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Sorry won't clean the floors," Lyra said, her boot nudging Alara's shoulder. "Get back to it. And when you're done here, the stables need mucking out. The storm is coming, and I want the horses settled." The storm. A tremor of real fear, colder than the water on her hands, went through Alara. The elders had been whispering about it for days. A white fury, a blizzard the likes of which hadn't been seen in a generation. To be caught outside in that, it was a death sentence. But she only nodded, her chin tucked to her chest. "Yes, Lyra." Arguing was pointless. It would only earn her another kick, or worse, no rations for the night. Her stomach was already a hollow, aching pit. Lyra gave a satisfied sniff and swept away, her fine leather boots clicking on the stones Alara had just cleaned. The scent of her expensive perfume, floral and sweet, was an insult in the cold, damp air. Alara gritted her teeth, the pain in her side a dull, throbbing drumbeat. She would not cry. Tears were a weakness she could not afford. She dipped her rag back into the freezing water, the shock of it a welcome distraction from the ache in her ribs. She would scrub. She would muck out the stables. She would survive. It was all she had ever known how to do. She pushed forward, her movements mechanical. Scrub, rinse, repeat. The world was a blur of gray stone and gray water. But inside, a tiny, stubborn ember refused to be extinguished. It was a spark of defiance so small she barely recognized it herself. It was the part of her that refused to break, the part that whispered, "I am still here." By the time she finished the hall, the sky outside the high arched windows had turned a bruised, sickly purple. The wind had begun to howl, a low, mournful sound that promised violence. Every instinct screamed at her to find a warm corner and hide, to disappear into the shadows where she belonged. But Lyra's orders were law. With a deep, shuddering breath, Alara pushed herself to her feet, her joints protesting. She grabbed her thin cloak, a ragged thing that offered little protection, and headed for the heavy oak doors that led to the courtyard. The stables were on the far side, a world away in the rising gale. The moment she stepped outside, the wind sliced into her like 1,000 tiny claws. It stole the breath from her lungs and plastered her thin tunic to her skin. Snow, hard and sharp as pellets of sand, drove against her face, blinding her. The world had vanished into a vortex of white. Panic seized her. She couldn't see the stables. She couldn't even see the wall of the great hall just a few feet away. The roar of the wind was deafening, swallowing all other sound. She was alone in the heart of a frozen monster. She took a hesitant step, then another, her hands outstretched as if she could feel her way through the maelstrom. The cold was a physical weight now, pressing down on her, crushing the life out of her. Her feet were numb inside her worn boots. Her ears burned. How long had she been out here? Minutes? An eternity? Time had lost all meaning. She stumbled, her foot catching on an unseen root or stone, and fell hard into a snowdrift. The snow was soft for a moment, a cold embrace, before it began to suck the last of her warmth away. This is it, she thought, a strange sense of calm washing over her. This is how it ends. Not with a bang, but with a quiet freezing in the dark. At least it would be peaceful. No more scrubbing, no more kicks, no more hunger. She was so tired. It would be so easy to just close her eyes, to let the white silence take her. She let her head sink deeper into the snow, the fight draining out of her. Then, something shifted in the blizzard's roar. A new sound, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the ground. It was the sound of a predator, a wolf, but bigger, much bigger. Terror, sharp and potent, cut through her lethargy. She tried to move, to push herself up, but her limbs wouldn't obey. They were heavy, frozen things. She was trapped. A shape materialized out of the swirling snow. A figure so vast it seemed to block out the storm itself. It was a man, impossibly broad-shouldered, wrapped in thick black furs that were dusted with white. He moved with a predatory grace that sent a fresh wave of fear through her. But it was his eyes that held her captive. In the gloom of the storm, they glowed. Not a reflection, but an internal fire. They were the color of molten gold, ancient and powerful and utterly terrifying. He stopped a few feet from her, his head tilted. He was studying her, his golden gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch, burning away the layers of cold. The scent of pine and winter storms and something else, something wild and primal, rolled off him in waves. She was dying. She had to be. This was a winter spirit, a god of the storm come to claim her. He took a step closer, sinking to one knee beside her in the snow. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming. He made the world feel small. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and calloused, encased in a leather glove. She flinched, a pathetic, reflexive movement. She expected a blow, a shove, the casual cruelty she had always known. Instead, his gloved fingers brushed the snow from her cheek. The touch was impossibly gentle. No one had ever touched her with such care. He pulled off his glove, revealing a hand scarred and weathered by time and battle. He pressed his bare fingers to the pulse point on her neck. His skin was warm. Not just warm, but hot, a furnace against her frozen flesh. The heat was a shock, a jolt of life that made her gasp. And then it happened. The moment his skin met hers, the world exploded. Not with sound, but with light and fire. A searing, white-hot pain shot up her arm from the point of contact, a fire that raced through every vein and set her soul ablaze. It was agony, but it was also something else, a connection, a current of raw power arcing between them. She screamed, a thin, ragged sound that was instantly devoured by the wind. She arched her back, her body convulsing in the snow. On her collarbone, just below the hollow of her throat, a mark was burning itself into her skin. It felt like a brand, a star of pure silver fire searing her to her very core. Through the haze of pain, she saw his eyes. The gold had intensified, burning so brightly they were like two miniature suns. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of profound, earth-shaking shock and possession. He stared at her, not at her face, but at the place on her collarbone where the mark was forming. His expression was one of stunned, absolute recognition. He looked as if he had been searching for 1,000 years and had finally, impossibly, found what he was looking for. The pain began to subside, leaving behind a deep, humming thrum beneath her skin. The cold was gone, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from him, flowing into her. She was weak, trembling, but she was no longer dying. He gently pulled back the ragged collar of her tunic. His gaze fell upon the newly formed mark, a swirling, intricate spiral of silver lines that seemed to shimmer with its own light. It looked like a galaxy captured on her skin. He looked from the mark back to her face, his golden eyes wide with a raw, unguarded emotion she couldn't name. It was awe. It was disbelief. It was a fierce, undeniable certainty. His voice, when he spoke, was deeper than thunder, a gravelly rumble that seemed to shake the very air. Mine. The word was not a question. It was a statement of fact, a declaration, a claiming. It settled over her, heavy as a mantle, and a part of her soul she didn't even know existed resonated with it, humming in perfect, terrifying harmony. Who was this man? What was happening to her? Her mind, conditioned by years of abuse, screamed at her to run. This was a trap, a danger far greater than any she had ever known. But her body, her very essence, betrayed her. It leaned into his heat, craved his presence. The new, strange thrumming under her skin recognized him. It knew him. It felt like coming home. Confusion warred with terror. She tried to pull away, a feeble, clumsy struggle. "No," she whispered, the word barely a puff of frozen air. He simply ignored her protest, his gaze never leaving her face. He carefully pulled his fur-lined cloak from his massive shoulders and wrapped it around her. It was heavy and smelled of him, pine and winter and power. The warmth was immediate and overwhelming, cocooning her in a way she had never experienced. It felt like safety. With effortless strength, he slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her from the snow as if she weighed nothing. He cradled her against his chest, her head resting against the hard muscle and fur. The heat from his body was a constant, living furnace, driving out the last of the deep, settled cold. "I have you," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against her ear. She was too weak, too overwhelmed to fight. The world had tilted on its axis. The storm still raged around them, but it couldn't touch her here, in his arms. It was as if he were the eye of the hurricane, a center of calm and impossible heat. She closed her eyes, the last of her energy fading, and surrendered to the darkness, her last conscious thought the burning echo of his word. Mine. She awoke slowly, drifting up from a deep, dreamless sleep. For the first time in her memory, she was not cold. She was enveloped in a profound warmth, a cocoon of soft furs and heavy wool blankets. A fire crackled merrily in a massive stone hearth nearby, casting a flickering golden glow across the room. The room itself was staggering. The ceiling was high, supported by thick wooden beams. Rich tapestries depicting ancient hunts and battles hung on the stone walls. The bed she lay in was huge, a four-poster carved from some dark, polished wood. It was a room fit for a king. Panic began to bubble in her chest. Where was she? She sat up, the furs pooling around her waist. She was wearing a simple linen nightdress, clean and soft against her skin. Her own ragged, filthy clothes were gone. And her collarbone, it tingled. a faint, persistent hum. She reached up with a trembling hand and traced the mark. Her fingers met smooth, raised lines. It was real. It hadn't been a fever dream born of the cold. The man from the storm was sitting in a high-backed chair by the fire, watching her. He was uncloaked now, dressed in simple black trousers and a tunic that stretched taut across the formidable expanse of his chest and shoulders. The firelight danced on his harsh, beautiful features and glinted in his dark hair. His golden eyes were fixed on her, their intensity undiminished. He wasn't smiling, but the look on his face was not unkind. It was watchful, patient. "You are awake," he stated. His voice was still a deep rumble, but it was softer in the quiet room. Ilara pulled the furs up to her chin, a useless gesture of defense. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. "Where am I?" "I am Kale," he said, as if that should explain everything. "And you are in my fortress, in my lands. You are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She had never been safe. "Why did you bring me here?" He rose from his chair and walked toward the bed. He moved with a silent, fluid grace that was mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. He was a predator, and every instinct she had honed for survival was screaming at her. Yet the bond humming beneath her skin sang a different song, a song of welcome and recognition. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his sheer size dominating the space. "The storm would have killed you," he said simply. "I could not leave you." It was more than that. She knew it. It was about the mark, the fire, the word he had spoken. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, her hand instinctively covering the mark on her collarbone. His gaze softened, a flicker of something that looked like pain in his golden eyes. "I did nothing to you, little one. The bond did this. It chose." "The bond?" she asked, her mind reeling. "I don't understand." "The soul bond," he explained, his voice laced with a reverence that sent a shiver down her spine. "It is a connection of fate, older than the mountains. It chooses one mate for those of my line, one soul in all of existence. I have waited centuries for you." Centuries. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and impossible. This man, this Kale, was ancient, an alpha king, the supreme leader of all the packs, a figure of myth and terror she'd only heard about in hushed, fearful whispers. And he was claiming her, a nameless, worthless Omega, as his fated mate. It was a mistake. It had to be. A cruel joke. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You're wrong. I'm nobody. An Omega, a servant. The bond would not choose me." The words tumbled out, a litany of her own worthlessness she had recited to herself 1,000 times. "The bond does not care for station or title," Kale said, his voice firm, absolute. "It cares only for the soul, and it chose yours." He gestured to her collarbone. "That mark is proof. It has claimed you for me, and me for you." She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Fear and a wild, terrifying flicker of hope warred within her. Could it be true? Could she be more than the nothing girl? Could this powerful, terrifying man truly want her? Before she could process it further, the heavy wooden door to the chamber opened. A stern-faced woman in healer's robes entered, followed by several servants carrying trays of food and pitchers of water. And behind them, trailing in their wake like a venomous snake, was Lyra. Ilara's blood ran cold. Lyra's eyes widened in shock as she took in the scene. Ilara in the Alpha King's bed, wearing his sigil on her skin, being looked upon by him with an expression of intense focus. The shock in Lyra's face quickly curdled into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," Lyra breathed, her voice dripping with venom. She took a step forward, but Kael shifted his body, a subtle movement that placed him squarely between Lyra and the bed. It was a clear, unspoken warning. "What is the meaning of this, Your Majesty?" Lyra asked, forcing a tone of sweet concern that didn't reach her eyes. Her pack was a vassal to the king, and she was part of the delegation sent to his fortress for the winter solstice. "This is one of our Omegas, a runaway. She should be punished, not coddled in your chambers." Kael's golden eyes narrowed, turning from molten gold to hard, dangerous chips of amber. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "She is not your Omega," he growled, the sound low and lethal. "She is my mate, and you will address her as you would your queen." The silence that followed was absolute. The servants froze. The healer's eyes were wide. Lyra's face went pale, then flushed a blotchy, furious red. The insult was a physical blow, and her humiliation was a palpable thing in the air. Lyra's gaze flickered to the shimmering silver mark on Alara's collarbone, which was still visible above the neckline of the nightdress. Her eyes, filled with a viper's jealousy, locked on it. In that moment, Alara saw more than just spite. She saw a calculating ambition. She saw a threat. Lyra bowed stiffly, a mockery of respect. "My apologies, Your Majesty. I was mistaken." She backed out of the room, her eyes never leaving Alara, promising retribution. Alara trembled under the weight of Kael's declaration. "My mate, your queen." The words were too big, too grand. She felt like a child playing dress-up in borrowed clothes that were 1,000 sizes too large. She was not a queen. She was the girl who scrubbed floors. Kael turned back to her, the hardness in his face melting away. He saw the fear in her eyes. "You have nothing to fear from her," he said softly. "No one will harm you here. I will not allow it." He dismissed the healer and servants with a wave of his hand, leaving them alone once more. He sat on the edge of the massive bed, careful not to get too close, as if he were afraid of startling a wild animal. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the tray of food left on a nearby table. There was roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and fruit, more food than Alara had seen in a week. Her stomach growled, a loud, embarrassing noise in the quiet room. A faint smile touched Kael's lips. It transformed his harsh face, making him look younger, almost gentle. "It is yours." Timidly, she reached for a piece of bread. Her hand shook. He made no move to stop her. She ate, wolfing down the food with a desperation that shamed her. But he didn't judge. He just watched, his golden eyes soft. This new reality was disorienting. One day she was starving in a blizzard. The next, she was being called a queen by a legendary king. It was too much. The chasm between who she was and who he claimed she was felt impossibly wide. Over the next few days, Kael was a constant, steady presence. He was patient, never pushing her, never demanding anything from her. He would sit by the fire and tell her stories of his long life, of the world beyond the narrow confines of her pack. He spoke of mountains that touched the sky, and forests so old they remembered the birth of stars. He brought her clothes, soft wool dresses in deep greens and blues, and warm, fur-lined boots. She had never worn anything new, anything that wasn't a hand-me-down. Each gift felt like a brand, marking her as something she was not. She began to feel a desperate, fragile hope take root in her heart. Could this be real? Could she truly have a place here? A home? Could she be loved? The bond between them was a constant hum, a silent conversation beneath the surface of their words. When he was near, she felt a sense of peace, of completeness she had never known. When he left the room, a phantom ache settled in her chest, a feeling of being untethered. But the fear never truly left. She would catch glimpses of Lyra in the fortress corridors, her face a mask of cold fury. And sometimes, at night, Ilara would wake from nightmares of freezing cold and mocking laughter, her own worthlessness a suffocating shroud. She was an imposter in this castle, a crow dressed in a swan's feathers. How long until the Alpha King realized his mistake? How long until he cast her out, back into the cold? One afternoon, Kale took her to the castle's library. It was a vast, circular room lined from floor to ceiling with thousands of books. A domed glass ceiling allowed the winter sun to stream in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. "You can read?" he asked gently. She shook her head, ashamed. "Omegas are not taught." "I will teach you," he said, his voice soft but absolute. He led her to a table and opened a large, leather-bound book. He pointed to the first letter. "This is the first mark." His large, calloused finger rested next to hers on the page. The casual touch sent a jolt of warmth through her, a pleasant echo of the fire that had forged their bond. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to believe. She leaned into his warmth, her fear receding. She looked up at him, a real smile gracing her lips for the first time. His answering smile was like the sunrise, chasing away all the shadows. That was the moment the trap was sprung. The library doors burst open. Lyra stood there, flanked by two hulking guards Ilara didn't recognize. They were not Kale's men. Their armor was black, etched with a sinister, fiery symbol. The Ember Covenant. A dark cult of rogue wolves who sought to usurp the old powers. "There she is," Lyra announced, her voice triumphant. "The Omega whore who bewitched the king." Kale was on his feet in an instant, a furious snarl ripping from his throat. He moved in front of Ilara, a living shield of muscle and rage. "You dare bring these abominations into my home?" he roared, his voice shaking the very books on their shelves. The two guards drew swords of black, wicked-looking metal, but they weren't for Kale. One of them lunged, not at the king, but at Ilara. Kale moved faster than she thought possible, intercepting the guard and throwing him across the room with bone-shattering force. But it was a diversion. The second guard grabbed her from behind, his arm a band of steel around her throat. A cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose. It smelled cloyingly sweet, and the world began to spin. "Kale!" She tried to scream, but the sound was muffled. Her last sight was of Kale, his face contorted in a mask of pure fury, fighting to get to her as Lyra watched, a cruel, victorious smile on her face. Then everything went black. She awoke to pain, a dull, throbbing agony that seemed to emanate from her very soul. She was cold again, a deep, seeping chill that reminded her of the blizzard. She was chained to a stone wall, her arms stretched wide. The manacles were made of silver, cold and heavy against her skin. They burned. The silver did more than burn her flesh. It felt like it was poisoning her, creating a static that dampened the hum of the bond. The connection to Kale was still there, but it was faint, distant, a flickering candle in a hurricane. The ache of his absence was a physical wound, a gaping hole in her chest. She was in a dungeon, dark and smelling of damp earth and despair. A single torch sputtered on the wall, casting long, dancing shadows. A figure stepped out of the darkness. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in robes of black and crimson. His face was narrow, his eyes like chips of obsidian. He radiated an aura of cold, calculating malice. This was not a man driven by simple anger. This was a creature of ancient, hungry ambition. "So," the man said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper, "this is the king's great love, a frightened little mouse." This was Lord Vorlag, the Shadow King of the Ember Covenant. Lyra must have made a pact with him, trading Ilara for power. "What do you want with me?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling but defiant. Vorlag smiled, a thin, cruel slash in his pale face. "You, my dear, are the key. That bond your king treasures so much, It is his greatest strength. It connects him to the heart of his power, the ancient magic of his line. But a bond can be a conduit, a weapon. He paced before her, his movements like a spider weaving a web. We are going to use your unique life force, the very thing that drew the bond to you, to poison him. We will sever his connection through you. He will be left powerless, a king without a crown, and I will take his throne. He gestured to a dark altar in the center of the room, carved with twisted, profane runes. Your part in this is simple. You just have to die. Despair, absolute and soul-crushing, washed over her. He was going to use her to destroy Cale, the one person who had ever shown her kindness, the one person who had made her feel like she was worth something. The pain in her chest intensified. It was Cale. Through the static of the silver, she could feel his agony, his rage, his frantic searching. He was feeling their separation as keenly as she was. "No," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please." "Oh, he is coming for you," Vorlag said with a chuckle. "I am counting on it. It will be so much more satisfying to break him while he watches." Vorlag left her in the darkness, the single torch her only company. Hours stretched into an eternity. The cold, the pain, the despair, they were an endless ocean threatening to drown her. She was worthless, a tool to be used and discarded. Lyra was right. Cale was wrong. The bond had made a mistake. She let her head hang, the fight draining out of her. She was back in the snowstorm, dying alone. This was her fate. Hold on. The voice was not in her ears, but in her head. It was Cale, faint, strained, but unmistakably him. It was a thread of warmth in the suffocating cold. "Elara, hold on, I am coming." The connection was weak, but it was there, a desperate lifeline. He was fighting to reach her, not just with his army, but with his very soul. A tiny spark ignited in the desolate landscape of her heart, the ember she thought had been extinguished. He hadn't given up on her. He was coming. She had to fight. Not for herself, she didn't believe she was worth fighting for, but for him. She would not be the weapon that destroyed him. She pulled against the silver chains, gritting her teeth as they burned her wrists. It was useless. She was too weak. What had Vorlag said? Your unique life force. What did that mean? She had no power. She was an omega. But the bond had chosen her for a reason. Cale had said so. It cares only for the soul. She closed her eyes, turning her focus inward, away from the pain and the cold. She searched for that hum, the thread of her connection to Cale. She found it, faint and flickering. She poured all of her will, all of her desperate hope into it. She pictured his face, his golden eyes, the warmth of his smile. She felt something stir deep within her, a warmth, a light. It was small, like a single candle flame, but it was there. It was a power she had never known she possessed. It felt pure, like sunlight and new spring growth. The dungeon door crashed open. Vorlag returned, flanked by his acolytes. "It is time," he announced. "The king is at our gates." From outside the thick stone walls, she heard it. A howl. A sound of pure, untamed fury that was filled with such loss and rage that it made the very stones of the fortress vibrate. It was Cale. He was here. Vorlag's men unchained her and dragged her to the dark altar. They forced her onto the cold stone, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of terror and hope. Vorlag stood over her, a ritual dagger in his hand, its blade glowing with a sickly purple energy. "Let the Alpha King watch as his hope dies," Vorlag cried, raising the dagger. At that moment, the entire wall of the dungeon exploded inward in a shower of rock and dust. Cale stood there, framed by the chaos, his eyes burning like twin stars. He was no longer a king. He was a primal force of nature, an avatar of vengeance. His warriors, a tide of gray fur and flashing steel, poured in behind him. The battle was immediate and brutal. The clang of steel and the snarls of wolves filled the air. Kale cut a swath through Vorlag's forces, his movements a blur of deadly precision, his eyes never leaving Alara. Vorlag ignored the battle, his focus entirely on the ritual. "Too late," he hissed, plunging the dagger down toward Alara's heart. Time seemed to slow. She saw the descending blade. She saw Kale fighting to reach her, a look of sheer desperation on his face as another of Vorlag's lieutenants intercepted him. He wasn't going to make it. Rage, a pure, cleansing fire she had never felt before. Rage at Vorlag, at Lyra, at a lifetime of being told she was nothing. Rage at the thought of Kale being hurt, of his light being extinguished because of her. No, the word was a silent scream in her soul. The tiny flame of light inside her erupted. It was not a candle flame anymore. It was a supernova. A tidal wave of pure, warm, golden light exploded from her body. It was the light of 1,000 sunrises, the life force of a spring meadow, the raw, untamed power of healing and creation. The wave of light slammed into Vorlag, throwing him back against the far wall. The ritual dagger dissolved into dust before it could touch her. The dark magic on the altar cracked and shattered. The silver chains on her wrists turned to smoke and vanished. The light washed over the dungeon, and Vorlag's acolytes screamed as the pure energy burned away their dark enchantments, leaving them stunned and powerless. Alara sat up, her body humming with a power that felt both new and anciently familiar. The light still clung to her, making her skin glow, her hair a halo of fire. The mark on her collarbone shone with the brilliance of a star. She was not the nothing girl. She was not the ghost. She stood, her legs steady, and faced Vorlag as he struggled to his feet. He stared at her, his obsidian eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "What are you?" he choked out. "I am his," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority she had never possessed. "And he is mine." She raised her hand, and a beam of concentrated light shot from her palm, striking Vorlag squarely in the chest. He screamed as the life-giving energy proved a poison to his shadowy soul, and he crumbled into a pile of ash and whispers. The battle stopped. Kale's warriors and the remaining Covenant members stared at her in stunned silence. She stood in the center of the room, a beacon of light in the oppressive darkness. Then Kale was there. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his face a mixture of awe, relief, and a love so profound it stole her breath. He reached for her, his hands hesitating for a moment, as if she were a celestial being he was afraid to touch. She closed the final step, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Kale," she breathed. "Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against him in an embrace that was both fierce and tender. He buried his face in her hair, his massive body trembling. "I thought I had lost you." "You found me," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. The bond between them flared to life, stronger and brighter than ever before, a blazing sun of connection that filled every empty, broken space inside her. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his golden eyes searching her face. "Your power." "It's always been there," she realized, a sense of wonder filling her. "I just didn't know." He touched the glowing mark on her collarbone, his fingers tracing the silver spiral. "You are a life-bringer," he murmured in awe. "A soul of pure creation. A legend I thought was lost to time." As his fingers traced her mark, a brilliant light flared. She felt a searing heat on the back of her own hand, and he gasped, pulling his away. There, on the back of his hand, was a new mark, a perfect mirror image of the one on her collarbone, glowing with the same silver light. The bond was complete. not just a claiming, but a willing, mutual acceptance. She had claimed him as surely as he had claimed her. He looked from his hand to her face, a slow, breathtaking smile spreading across his features. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence, a kiss of promises kept and a future found. It was the kiss of coming home. When they emerged from the fallen fortress, the sun was rising. Kale's warriors were tending to the wounded and securing the prisoners. Among them, bound and defeated, was Lyra. Her face was a mask of utter ruin as she saw Ilara standing at Kale's side, not as a victim, but as a victor, glowing with power and purpose. Kale didn't even spare Lyra a glance. His only focus was Ilara. He kept one arm wrapped securely around her as they walked through the camp. His warriors, the fiercest wolves in the land, lowered their heads in deference as she passed. They were not bowing to a rescued Omega. They were bowing to their queen. Back at Kale's fortress, he led her to the great balcony overlooking the valley. The snow from the blizzard had stopped, and the world was blanketed in a pristine, glittering white. His people had gathered in the courtyard below, their faces turned up toward them. Kale raised his hand for silence. His voice boomed across the courtyard, filled with pride and unwavering conviction. "For centuries I have led you alone," he proclaimed. "But the fates have been kind. The ancient bond has been fulfilled. Today, you do not just have a king, you have a queen." He turned to her, taking her hand and raising it high. "Behold Ilara, my mate, my heart. She is a life-bringer, a beacon of light in the darkness. She is your queen." A roar of approval rose from the crowd below. It was a wave of sound, of acceptance, of welcome. It washed over Ilara not with fear, but with a profound sense of peace. She looked at Kale, at his strong, handsome face, his golden eyes filled with a love that was as vast and ancient as the mountains around them. She looked out at the sea of faces below, at her new people, her new family. She was no longer the ghost, the shadow, the nothing girl. She was Ilara. She was a life-bringer. She was a queen. She was home. And for the first time in her life, she knew, with every fiber of her being, that she was worthy of it. The cold was finally, truly gone, banished forever by the warmth of a love that had waited centuries to find her.